So, guys, Cowboys Training Camp Day 8 has officially wrapped up, and we got some big updates coming out of Oxnard. Today's practice wasn't just about highlight plays. It gave us a much clearer picture of where this roster is heading. A few players continued to build serious momentum, some encouraging injury updates came in, and one position battle suddenly became a lot more interesting than it was just a few days ago. As we get closer to preseason football, every rep matters, and after what we saw on Day 8, the competition for several roster spots is only heating up. So let me break down everything that happened at today's practice and why this next big battle could have a major impact on the Cowboys moving forward. What's up, Cowboys? Welcome to the NFL Playbook, Cowboys. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Okay, let's start on the offensive side of the ball because this is where the day really got exciting for me. George Pickens is going crazy out there, and I mean that in the best way possible. I'm talking about his full efforts, diving catches, laying out in the dirt to make plays. Remember how much noise there was about him earlier in the offseason? People wondering if he was even going to show up ready to compete. Well, he answered that question with his pads on. This is a contract year for him, and you can feel it in every rep. There was one play in particular where he stacked the defender, tracked the ball perfectly over his shoulder, and just made it look easy. Now, you know who that defender was. Actually, Deron Bland was the man in coverage on that play, and he actually played at his best level. He squeezed Pickens to the sideline, used his body without even drawing a flag, and forced a tight window. That's textbook technique from a corner. But at the end of the day, Pickens still came down with it, and that tells you everything about where his mindset is right now. Honestly, when you see a guy putting that kind of effort into a training camp rep that doesn't even count for anything official, it says a lot about where his head is at going into the season. Guys who are checked out don't die for footballs in practice, they save that for game day. This is a guy who wants to prove something, and so far, every single practice report backs that up. Now, staying on offense, we got to talk about Dak Prescott, because something interesting is happening with how the league actually views him. There was a quarterback tiers piece that came out, and executives around the league were asked to rank every starting quarterback anonymously. Dak jumped up several spots this year, and he's now knocking on the door of that top tier. The general sentiment from league insiders is that it's getting harder and harder to find real holes in Dak's game. No matter what gets thrown at him, he just keeps producing at a high level year after year. And honestly, the numbers back it up. Over the last 10 years, he's near the top of the league in completion percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, and passer rating. These aren't stats from one good season. This is a decade-long body of work. So, when people act surprised that he's finally getting his flowers, I mean, some of us have been saying this for years. It's just nice to see the rest of the league starting to catch up to what we already knew. Moving along the offensive side, let's talk about running backs because there were a couple of names that stood out to me on tape. Phil Mafah looked genuinely fast getting through the hole, quicker than I remember him being last year, and he's starting to show exactly why there was excitement around him coming out. And then there's Israel Abanikanda, who a lot of people know as the running back who bounced around the league. Jets, Niners, a stint with Green Bay before landing with the Cowboys. He's got some juice too, getting through contact and finding extra yards after first contact. Neither of these guys is walking into a starting job, let's be real about that, but that's not really the point. The point is depth. When you've got backs who can make defenses respect the run even in a backup role, that changes how opponents have to prepare for this offense. Now here's where things get really interesting, because this next storyline is exactly why I titled this video the way I did. There's a real battle brewing at the back end of the receiver room, and it's not about who catches the most passes, it's about special teams. Traeshon Holden has been putting on a show as a gunner in punt coverage, and I mean full effort, running down the field like his roster spot depends on it, because it kind of does. If you think back to how Ryan Flournoy carved out his spot last year, it wasn't just about being the 5th or 6th receiver on the depth chart. It was about being dominant on special teams, making himself impossible to cut. That's exactly the blueprint Traeshon Holden is following right now. When the roster gets down to the final cuts and the coaching staff is deciding between a couple of receivers who look similar on paper, it's going to come down to who brings something extra. And right now, Holden is making that decision a lot harder for them, which is a great problem for this team to have. It also lines up nicely with where the schedule is headed. The team has a joint practice with the Rams coming up, and live reps against another team always tell you a lot more than practice against your own guys every single day. That's usually where these kinds of roster battles start to separate, because now it's not just about beating a teammate, it's about showing out against outside competition too. Okay, now let's shift over to the defensive side of the ball, and first, the injury update everybody wants to hear about. Jaishawn Barham was pulled from practice today with what they're calling a groin issue. Now, before anybody starts to panic, from what's being reported, it sounds like a mild, precautionary situation rather than anything serious. Soft tissue injuries can linger if you push through them too fast, so honestly, sitting him down for a few days is probably the smart move here. Better safe now than dealing with a bigger issue in September. Along those same lines, Jaylen Thompson is still working his way back from that hip injury. The team hasn't put a clear timetable on his return yet, but that's a name to keep an eye on because getting him back to full health matters for the depth in that secondary. And speaking of depth, I want to talk about the defensive tackle room for a second because I don't think people fully appreciate how deep this group has become. Otito Ogbonnia took a trip to the injury tent today but returned to practice shortly after, and Jonathan Bullard is still working through a hamstring issue that's kept him out for a few days now. But here's the thing that stands out to me. Just a couple years ago, either one of these guys would have been a starter on this roster. Now they're playing behind Kenny Clark and Quinnen Williams, and they're still performing at a starting caliber level. That's not a knock on them. That's a credit to how much this front has been upgraded overall. For years, this fan base has talked about needing more juice up front, and now you've got a rotation where the backups look like guys who could start elsewhere in the league. Now, I do want to address something that got a little overblown on social media, and that's the Caleb Downs situation. There was a play in coverage against Ryan Flournoy where Downs was lined up in the nickel, and people online started acting like it was some kind of red flag, like maybe he should just stay at safety full time. But if you actually watch the play closely, that's not what happened at all. Downs knew the ball was already in the air. He read the receiver's hands, and he eased off because there was nothing left to do but let the catch happen. In a real game, with the intensity turned up, that's a rep where he wraps up hard. This is training camp, guys. Guys are working on technique, not trying to blow each other up on every single rep. Making a big deal out of one padded practice rep is exactly the kind of overreaction that happens every single training camp and is just not worth getting worked up about. While we're talking defense, I also want to give a shout out to the linebacker room, specifically Dee Winters, who has looked really sharp out there. What stood out to me on tape was the footwork. No wasted steps, closing downhill under control instead of taking a bad angle and having to recover. If you compare that to some of the linebacker play this roster has dealt with in years past, guys taking false steps and getting caught out of position, this is a noticeable improvement. A clean technique like that is the difference between a linebacker who's a step late to the football and one who's already there waiting. So that's everything from Cowboys Training Camp Day 8. We saw more standout performances on offense, a few encouraging injury updates, and some position battles that are only getting more competitive. As we get closer to preseason, every practice is becoming more important, and with the joint practices against the Rams coming up, we're about to get a much better idea of where this team really stands. Let me know your biggest takeaway from Day 8 down in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.